Our next speaker is from Scotland. Scotland has very much been on the agenda in Faroes, where we have followed the independence referendum back in 2014. And the whole of UK is very much on the radar here in the North Atlantic and elsewhere in Europe because of the Brexit. And that has also sparked and ignited two new discussions in Scotland about independence and referendum and things like that. And out of Scotland, from our nearest neighbour is Kenneth Gibson. He was elected to the very first Scottish parliament in 1999 in modern times, and he has served in the parliament for 19 years. And the floor is yours, Kenneth.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Magni, and also thank you to Hogney. And I have to say that I've never used one of these pieces of technology before, so I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. And first of all, I want to thank my Faroese hosts for their kindness and for inviting me here as a representative of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish National Party to speak to you today. I share your disappointment that Charles and Daniel were unable to bring the weather from their countries, but I brought the weather from my country. I've actually been very fascinated by this nation of the Faroe Islands for many years, and in fact on the 12th of July in my Facebook page I posted Faroese Nation, a 30-minute documentary that you may have seen, which many people in Scotland find inspirational about life here in the Faroes and how that inspires us in Scotland. So this is a two-way process. Little did I understand at that time that only 3 months later I would be here in the Faroes for the first time ever speaking to you. Now, normally I speak about 180 words a minute. Because of my Scottish accent, I will try and speak a little bit more slowly so that you can understand me. So, we meet today during one of the most tumultuous periods of UK and by extension Scottish politics. The chaos and uncertainty which has consumed Westminster following the 2016 referendum on leaving the European Union threatens to inflict serious and lasting harm on the lives of people across Scotland. Not content with failing to rebuild the economy after the economic collapse delivered by their Labour predecessors, the UK Tory government will deepen that hardship by delivering an economically nonsensical Brexit, which, in our view, would be nothing short of disaster for Scotland, with an anticipated 80,000 jobs lost and the door closed on the talented EU workers who support our economy, around 173,000 at present. This means a smaller, weaker, poorer Scottish economy, the exact opposite of what voters were promised by the UK government in 2014, when they were actually told that unless they voted no, Scotland would be thrown out of the European Union during the independence referendum. Of course, we in Scotland didn't vote for the Tory government. We hadn't voted Conservative in Scotland since 1955. We didn't vote for the referendum on leaving the European Union, and we didn't vote for Brexit. And in that referendum, 62% of people in Scotland voted to remain within the European Union. And we certainly did not vote to crash out of the European Union with no deal. Nevertheless, the SNP, and we have 35 members of the United Kingdom Parliament, has engaged constructively with each step of the Brexit process. Our MPs at Westminster, and I have to say my wife is one of them, have proven themselves willing to find solutions that work for Scotland but have been largely ignored. When the Scottish Parliament was urged to grant consent for Prime Minister Theresa May's EU withdrawal bill, the Scottish Parliament decisively rejected that by 93 votes to 30. Not only the 63 Scottish National Party MSPs supported it, but also Labour, Liberal Democrat and Green MSPs also. And the reason was because it would return 24 EU powers to the UK government post-Brexit. And many of these powers are intertwined with devolved powers, powers that Scotland has already. These powers include those over state aid for industry, genetically modified crops policy, fishing quotas and farm subsidies, all of which should rightfully be in Scotland's hands. Anything less than returning these is a Westminster power grab, and a shameless one at that. At Westminster, the UK government showed contempt for the devolved parliaments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as the EU withdrawal bill was pushed through without a single thought to the views of our devolved parliaments. This demonstrates that Westminster is not negotiating in good faith with the Scottish Parliament over Brexit, and the wider Scottish public is not blind to this. With that being said, what are the possible outcomes of Brexit? We could stay in the EU the way things are going, which is what Scotland voted for. We could be forced to leave. But the only sensible evidence-led option in our view is to stay in the single market and the customs union, even if we do leave. But should we be forced down the no-deal route, then the dislocation will be sudden, cumulative and long-lasting. Some suggest, although I personally believe it alarmist, that we will experience shortages because of customs delays, which will doubtless cause difficulties for businesses which export or rely on complex supply chains. It would mean a reduction in crucial investment from outside Scotland, a fortress mentality from a hostile UK government likely to see devolution as disposable. There remains also the Prime Minister's checkers proposals, which leave no one much the wiser as to what the terms of exit are or what the terms will be of any future relationship. To lay matters out plainly, if there is no offer and no possibility, at the very least, of a single market and customs union outcome, either for the UK as a whole or for Scotland as a differentiated part of it, then there is no meaningful option offered at all, and no option that can or will have SNP support. Of course, it's simply a fact that those keenest on Brexit are those who dislike Scotland having a parliament the most. Their voices are loud and heard at the heart of the UK government. They regard anything that interferes with the so-called sovereignty of Westminster as dangerous and unacceptable. They want rid of voices that speak of modern democracy, modern constitutions and modern trading agreements. Of course, regardless of the machinations and manoeuvres taking place in London and Brussels, the job of the SNP as a party and in government is to both make sure that Scotland flourishes no matter the circumstances we find ourselves in, but also to ensure that at the right moment the choice of independence can be made. I say at the right moment, not the most comfortable moment or the moment that best relieves our natural impatience for change, but the moment at which our country is persuaded, ready and determined to win. The Scottish Parliament has a mandate for independence, and indeed a majority of MSPs voted 69 to 59 last year to authorise the Scottish Government to request a transfer of powers from the UK Parliament to hold a second referendum. Voters in 2014 could never have anticipated the chaos we're now in just 4 years down the line, and they deserve another chance to decide Scotland's future, given the changing political and economic landscape that Brexit has brought. Our vision is to build on the powers of the Scottish Parliament and build on a record of achievement in government, whilst also showing people just what Scotland could achieve with the powers of independence. Sharing experience and knowledge with nations such as the Faroe Islands is a key part of that. We have a shared interest. After all, Faroese mitochondria are 84% Celtic female, the Y chromosome 87% Scandinavian male, that proves that Faroese Vikings raided Scotland and Ireland for women. I'm glad you're now a wee bit better behaved. As a member of the SNP's new campaigns committee, which is numbers 7 of us, chaired by SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown MSP, we are already laying the foundations for a future independence campaign. We are mobilising the SNP's vast membership base of 125,000, which is bigger than the UK Tory party, and designing new campaign materials and exploring new engaging ways of communicating to help attract new supporters to the cause of independence. We've hosted 3 national assemblies across Scotland, which proved to be a great platform to discuss economic policy. There have been demands for further events of this format, and we will explore taking this forward in future weeks and months. 13 days ago, we had a national day of action when our activists went out and knocked doors, held street stalls and spoke to voters. And last Saturday, we had a march through Edinburgh with over 100,000 people participating, calling for independence. Now, when I was just a boy, I went on an independence march and there were 300 of us. 300, now 100,000. So things have moved forward dramatically just in my lifetime. So we're on a campaign footing and putting forward our vision for a positive future for Scotland. A Delta Poll survey only this month found that Brexit would tip public opinion in Scotland towards independence, with 47% of Scots in favour of independence, 43% against, and 10% who did not know. Votes up for grabs. This is a fight the SNP can and will win. Finally, I'm joining you today fresh from our party conference in Glasgow, which concluded on Tuesday after 3 days of exciting, engaging policy and campaign discussions. The theme of the conference, which we had 4,000 delegates at, was hope. Many announcements emerged from conference demonstrating that we're moving towards an ever fairer Scotland, doing what we can with the powers that we have now. We heard from our First Minister that Scotland will put fair work first by extending fair work criteria such as the living wage to as many funding streams of business support grants as possible, meaning public money will support business which pay workers fairly, promote secure contracts and eliminate the gender pay gap. We heard from the Finance Secretary, Derek Mackay, that legislation to introduce Scotland's new National Investment Bank will be brought forward next year with a commitment to capitalise the bank with £2 billion, around 16 billion Danish crowns. We heard about a new infrastructure commission which will advise on investment priorities and, importantly, explore the feasibility of government-owned national infrastructure company. We are building a new Scotland, a Scotland for all. But we could do so much more free of the chaos and incompetence of Westminster. How much more hope will be possible when we take Scotland's future into Scotland's hands and become an independent country, we ask. It is our duty, it is our ambition, and it is our vision to build an independent Scotland, and an independent Scotland works for all. Thank you.
Yeah, you will not escape this place until you had some questions, okay?
That's why I'm still here.
But
thank you. I just want to continue from the question to Høgni Hoydal, or in relation to Scotland. Are you satisfied in Scotland that the basis for your right to self-determination is internal to the British legal system, or does the international legal aspect enter your debate?
Well, the international legal aspect doesn't really enter our debate. First of all, Scotland has its own legal system, which it has had since before the 1707 Act of Union. When Scotland and England united, they spent so many centuries trying to conquer Scotland. Eventually, the King of Scotland became King of England, and the two parliaments merged, so it was a kind of Scottish takeover, if you think about it. When our parliaments merged in 1707, there were two main criteria. Our legal system remained intact, and I know that's a major issue here in the Faroes because police and justice are under the control of Scotland, and I realise that they're not under control here. And secondly, our education system remained under Scottish control. We had 4 universities when England had 2, etc., etc. So, first country in the world with 3 education. So the position within the United Kingdom has been clearly set out because we had the Edinburgh Agreement before the 2014 referendum, which recognised that Scotland does have a right to independence and decide its own future. What the United Kingdom government is saying at the moment is that because of the Brexit negotiations and the fact that there's civil war within the Conservative Party and indeed the Labour Party as well over this particular issue, I'll give you just one little aside. The Labour Party's policy is constructive ambiguity to Brexit. What that means is we make people think who vote leave think we want to vote leave, we support leave, and people who remain, we want them to think we support remain. So, but anyway, the overall situation in the United Kingdom is that the UK government has said not while Brexit negotiations are ongoing, and we accept that position. But because our own Parliament has already voted that we can have a referendum, we have an electoral mandate. Our party get the highest share of the vote of any political party in Europe at the last election, 47%. Then we can call that referendum. And my own view is that it should be called around about this time next year. It should be called and held around about this time next year. One thing I would say is the difference between Scotland, and I had this debate in Catalonia a decade ago when I was out speaking there, is we have only one national party. All views left-wing, right-wing, liberal, whatever, are all under the one umbrella, because for us the most important issue is independence for Scotland, and therefore we have one united voice. That makes a big difference, because in Westminster elections, where it's first past the post, we can destroy generally any unionist party because they're split, whereas we can, with 45% of the vote in any constituency, can win almost anywhere. So that is very important, having a unified voice. I know that's not easy here, but that's how we have been able to build our party and put independence on the front foot. So a long-winded answer, but I hope that answers some of your question. One other thing I would say is, I realise you made the point about Faroese politicians going into the Riksdag in Copenhagen. I'm not just saying it because my wife is a member of the Westminster Parliament, but there are so many issues that are dealt with at the United Kingdom level. I'll just mention, well, there's so many, everything welfare, foreign policy, but let's just suggest Trident. The United Kingdom government wants to spend £200 billion, that's 1,600 billion Danish crowns, on a new nuclear missile system. Our MPs have to be in Westminster to vote against that, to make sure people know that Scotland doesn't want that. Not just because it would be based in Scotland, but we don't want nuclear weapons anywhere. So we think it's important that we have members of Parliament in there giving Scotland's voice. Otherwise, we would have unionist politicians who do not represent Scotland deciding for us. Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
God, look at this. The descendants of Vikings. Come on.
While they're gaining power to put forward more questions,
yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on how come that it has developed from this first march of yours with 300 people has raised to 100,000 in a fairly short
actually
term?
Well, it's quite astonishing. I joined the SNP. The SNP was formed in 1934, and it was a very much a fringe movement. So what happened there, our education system is Scottish, but was dominated by United Kingdom history. So when we were taught at school, we were only taught English history, never Scottish history or anything about Scotland, blah, blah, blah. So there was a very strong unionist British mentality in Scotland. There was an attempt after the Union to rename Scotland North Britain. England was still England, but Scotland was North Britain. So when I was a boy, you had the North British Railway Company, the North British Hotel, all these North British things, right? But after the Second World War, there was a kind of small movement for what was called a kind of Scottish Parliament. And it got 2 million signatures. And it was presented to Westminster, and Winston Churchill said the only way you will get a parliament is if you win elections. And so our party, which at that time had people from all political persuasions and all parties, you could be in the Labour Party, Conservative Party, Communist Party, whatever it happened to be. Communist Party was big, of course, in those days. All these parties you could, and be in the SNP. So then we decided you could only be a member of the SNP and no other political party. So 90% of people left, and the small group that were left were dedicated to pushing forward the independence idea. We didn't have any newspapers or radio stations. In 1959, we had only 2 candidates for Parliament out of 71 constituencies. And gradually, bit by bit, speaking to people, knocking doors, we built up and built up and built up and built up. And then, so the pressure for the Scottish Parliament, the unionist parties, Conservative and Labour, thought if they promise a kind of Danegeld idea, if you promise the Scottish people a wee parliament, then they won't want any more. So we had a referendum in 1997 to have the re-establishment of the Scottish Parliament. 75% of people supported that, and our Parliament was re-established in 1999. And since then, we have always seen devolution as a process, not an event. So it's not just Scotland gets these powers and that's it. We are always trying to build on those powers and get more and more powers devolved to us, as indeed the Faroes is. So we've just built up, and what happened in 2014 was astonishing. Our party had about 25,000 members. After the referendum, the Conservative and Labour parties had worked together, age-old enemies of left and right, and it was seen by a huge proportion of the people of Scotland that these parties were working against Scotland. And so after the referendum was narrowly lost, our membership went from 25,000 to over 100,000 in a week. Thousands of people, 10,000 people a day joined the party. And the Westminster elections, we went from having 6 MPs out of 59 to 56 out of 59. We swept all the unionists away. Places that had voted Labour for 70 years were transformed. Our vote was going, in my constituency, the vote went for our party from like 20, 50% almost overnight. So you can move mountains if the political mood music is correct and you have the right message. And it has to be positive, it has to be engaging, it has to be visionary. We did make mistakes in that referendum. I don't want to drone on too long, but one of the things I said this morning was our party leader thought we should have a 3-year referendum campaign. All that did was allow all the opposition to mobilise against us. When they had the Brexit referendum, it was 3 months, and the Brexit campaigners, it wasn't called by the Leavers, but it was one by the Leavers, because it was about their vision, not a vision I necessarily agreed with, but there was a vision that won through, so it's about the vision that matters rather than the fine detail. We produced a 700-page document about how an independent Scotland would look, and all that happens is they go to page 321 and say, what about that? And page 275, what about that? So it's about the vision thing, you know, self-determination, putting your own future in your own hands, you deciding for yourself, not your next door neighbour, even if they're the nicest neighbour. And as I said this morning, just one last thing I'll say, is our party leader always used to say, it's better to have a friendly neighbour than a surly lodger. In other words, it's better to have someone who lives next door to you and is your best friend, and Faroes would be best friends to Denmark, than have someone who is perhaps unhappy. So, and we like English people. I mean, they're closest to us in terms of history, sense of humour, language. We do like them. We just don't want to have their parliament run our country.
We have another question here.
Hello. My name is Jekwan. Let's say you have another independence referendum. Let's say you win. Let's say you establish an independent Scottish state.
Yay!
Yeah.
I can retire.
But by then, you're well and truly outside the European Union.
Yeah.
So what happens then?
Yeah, that's a really...
I want to point out we're outside the EU,
yeah,
as is Norway, as is Iceland.
Yeah. At the moment, our party position is very clear. We don't want to leave the European Union. There's a whole number of reasons for that, because, but I think we would have to decide on the circumstances then. I mean, it's not, you know, you can't really say, oh, we'll just argue to come back in again. I think we would have to look at the circumstances at that point. I think that's quite clear what we would do. I think the mood in our party is that we'd prefer to stay in, and most people in our party would prefer to go back in if we were not in the European Union and have to go through that probably tedious process of joining. But it may be that if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 years elapse, we think, do you know what? We can do perfectly well without outside the European Union. I think the economic shock would be initial, but I think after that it would be that perhaps we could survive and thrive outside the European Union. I don't see any reason why not, to be perfectly honest with you. I always think, I was saying this morning, independence is not a miracle cure. I mean, you know, many countries have become independent with no resources, you know. I mean, for example, Singapore, whatever you think of the democratic structures here, has become an economic titan in the world. With the Ukraine has become a poverty-stricken backwater despite having phenomenal resources. It's about the quality of people you elect and the policies they take forward. But at the end of the day, any decision you make yourself has got to be better than someone else making it. And again, I always point out to people when I'm chatting to ordinary people on the doorstep, I always say, any country that's got independence has never surrendered that afterwards. They don't say, do you know what, I don't like taking these decisions, go on, you take them. You know what I mean? To me, it's just a sensible, straightforward thing, and more and more people are coming to realise that, you know. And I think most people in the Faroes will feel liberated when they have their own country. I mean, to stand on your own stage. Even last night, I went to the football match last night, and it wasn't the best result for the Faroe Islands, but I just think it's great that the Faroe Islands is competing in FIFA. I mean, 30 years ago, you didn't. We still remember the glorious 1-0 victory over Austria, which I think was fantastic. So I mean,
more or less beating Scotland.
It's not about separate. Yeah. Okay, we were complacent the first 20 minutes. God, I've lost my train of. We don't want to separate. We want to participate. We want Scotland, and I'm sure the Faroes and Catalonia are the same, want to be part of the world's institutions. We want to be, we work with people, share things. You know, we're not talking about isolation, we're talking about partnership. But with a partnership where we take the main decisions that affect our people.
Kenneth Gibson, thank you very much. Give him applause.